When I was a child, one of my favorite things to do was visit my neighbors. They had so many pet rabbits, turtles, hamsters, and even ducks, and I loved spending hours playing with them. We were so close that my neighbors would leave the animal pen open for me to come and go as I pleased, even when they weren't home. It was like their backyard was my second home, a place where I could escape and feel at peace with the animals. I spent countless afternoons there, feeding the animals, running around the yard, and simply enjoying the company of the creatures. It wasn't just the animals that made the place special, though. It was the sense of freedom I had. There was something so comforting about being there, the air always filled with the sounds of ducks quacking or the soft rustling of the rabbits hopping around. It felt like a world away from any worries. The backyard was a small paradise to me. I remember the feeling of the cool grass beneath my feet, the way the sun filtered through the leaves of the trees, casting dapple light all over the ground. Everything felt safe there. My neighbors were kind, and the animals were always friendly. I never questioned anything that happened there, and I didn't need to. I was a child lost in the joy of those simple moments. But one day, something happened that would change all of that. It was a day just like any other, but everything would come crashing down in an instant, shattering the peaceful world I had known. That day, as I played with the animals in the yard, I looked over at the tree in the backyard and saw something I'll never forget. It's a sight that still haunts me to this day. One afternoon, I went to my neighbor's house as usual to play with the animals. I spent my time running around, feeding the rabbits and chasing the ducks. It was a typical, carefree day until something happened that would change everything. While I was distracted, laughing and playing with the animals, I glanced over toward the tree at the back of their yard. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but as I looked closer, my heart stopped. There, hanging from the branches, was my neighbor. His lifeless body swayed gently in the breeze, a haunting image that froze me in place. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. The shock was so intense that I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing or why it was happening. The scene was almost unreal, like something out of a nightmare. I blinked several times, hoping it would disappear, but it only became more real with each passing second. The wind rustled the leaves, and the quiet of the yard was broken only by the soft quacking of the ducks and the distant chirping of birds. It was as if time stood still, and I was trapped in that moment, unable to tear my eyes away from the horrifying sight. I couldn't make sense of it. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. My mind raced, but I couldn't understand why he was there like that. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to do anything but stare. It felt like the world around me had suddenly shifted, and I had stepped into a nightmare. And in that moment, I knew something was terribly wrong. Terrified, I ran back home as fast as I could, my heart racing and my mind in a complete state of panic. I burst through the door, gasping for breath, and immediately told my mother what I had seen. She looked at me in shock, her face pale as I explained every detail. Without hesitation, she called the police, her hands shaking as she spoke to them. Once the call was made, my mother sat me down and tried to calm me. She gently explained what had happened to my neighbor. His wife had taken her own life, and he, overwhelmed by grief and loss, had followed suit. The tragedy was something that no one would have expected, and my mother did her best to make me understand. She told me that sometimes people in deep pain can make terrible decisions, and that's what had happened to him. Even though her explanation was clear, it didn't make the image in my mind fade. The horror of seeing him there, hanging lifeless for that tree, was burned into my memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, his face frozen in a terrifying stillness, the branches of the tree swaying gently in the wind. The more I tried to push it away, the stronger the memory clung to me, refusing to let me forget. As the days went by, I found myself haunted by that image, unable to shake the trauma it caused. No matter where I went or what I did, the memory followed me like a shadow. I couldn't escape it. And even though my mother tried to comfort me, the truth was that I would never be the same again. The nightmare had become a part of my reality. The image of what I saw that day has never left me. No matter how many years have passed, I still can't look at a tree, especially on rainy days, without that horrifying scene flooding my mind. The branches, the lifeless body hanging there, it's like it's imprinted on my memory, always lurking, ready to resurface. The fear I felt back then never truly disappeared. It's always there, just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to remind me. Even in moments of calm, when I'm alone or trying to relax, the nightmares begin. I close my eyes and suddenly I'm back in that backyard, standing frozen in front of that tree. The wind rustles the leaves, and the scene plays out again in vivid detail, the horror consuming me as it did that day. I can't escape it, no matter how hard I try. It's like I'm trapped in an endless loop, forced to relive that terror over and over again. The nightmares have taken on a life of their own, coming for me even in my sleep. I wake up in cold sweats, heart pounding, convinced that I'm still there, still witnessing that same gruesome sight. I've tried everything to forget, to move on, but it's as if the trauma has rooted itself deep inside me. No matter how much time has passed, I can't outrun the memory. It's become a part of who I am now, a scar that time refuses to heal. The fear of seeing that tree, of being pulled back to that moment, lingers in everything I do. I avoid places with too many trees, and I can't stand being outdoors when the weather turns dark and stormy. It's not just the physical memories that haunt me, but the feeling of being trapped in a nightmare that I can't escape. The trauma has become my shadow, a constant reminder of that terrifying day, and I know that I will never be able to truly move on from it. The terror from that day has become an inescapable part of my life. I can never shake the feeling that I am being watched, that there's something lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to turn around. It's a constant pressure, an invisible presence that follows me wherever I go. Even now, as an adult, I feel the weight of that moment, as though the shadows of the past are never far behind me. The tree has become a symbol of all the pain and fear that I can't escape. Every time I see one, I'm reminded of that day, of the horror that scarred my mind and soul. No matter how hard I try, I can't unsee what I saw. It's a reminder that some images, some events, are too powerful to forget. That tree, once a simple part of the landscape, has turned into a haunting figure in my memories. representing everything dark and twisted about that day. I often find myself wondering if I truly understand what happened in that house. There's a part of me that questions whether I saw everything or if there's more to the story that I'll never know. I've always felt that there's something darker hidden in that memory, something I was too young to comprehend. The secrets that lurk in that house, the suffering that led to that tragic moment, there is more to it than I can grasp. And I feel it, even now. As I live with this fear, I realize that I'll never be free from it. That day, that scene, will always be with me. I don't know if it's the memory of what happened or the feeling that I've been left with a secret I wasn't meant to understand, but it's something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. And the worst part is, I'm not sure if I ever truly want to know the full truth about what happened in that house. Some things, perhaps, are better left hidden. When I was a kid, I spent countless hours at my grandma's house, and one of the main reasons was her dog, Bob. He was this big, black, shaggy dog with boundless energy, always eager to play. Bob was more than just a pet. He was a friend, a companion, and almost like a guardian. Everyone in the neighborhood knew and adored him. He was gentle yet playful, with a way of bringing joy to anyone who came by. Bob had this routine of running around the yard, chasing after birds, and just being the big goof he was. He never seemed to get tired, always full of life, with his tongue hanging out and his tail wagging as he trotted around. Being with him made me feel safe and happy, like nothing bad could ever happen when he was nearby. There was something comforting about his presence. I always knew that if I went over to my grandma's house, Bob would be there, ready to play or just sit beside me. He had this way of making me laugh, even on days when I didn't feel like it. It was like he sensed my mood and knew just how to lift my spirits. Bob was such a constant part of those days at my grandma's house that I couldn't imagine her place without him. He was part of the family and, in a way, part of me. Little did I know that one of those visits would turn into something that would haunt me for years. One afternoon, while I was out playing soccer with friends, my mom called me unexpectedly. She said she and my dad had to leave for work and wouldn't be back until late. She told me I'd need to go over to my grandma's house for the night. At first, I felt a bit disappointed. I had plans to stay out with my friends, but then she mentioned that Bob would be there with me. Somehow, knowing that I'd have my trusty companion around made me feel a lot better about it. Bob and I were inseparable when I was at Grandma's, so the idea of spending the evening with him was comforting. The thought of running around the yard with him, playing fetch, or just relaxing on the porch made the change of plans almost exciting. So I wrapped up my game, grabbed my things, and started walking over to Grandma's, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. As I walked, I started thinking about all the little routines Bob and I had whenever I stayed at Grandma's. I imagined us playing until dusk, then settling down for dinner, maybe even sneaking him a few scraps from the table. It was the kind of night I'd come to look forward to, quiet, safe, familiar. When I finally arrived, Grandma greeted me with her usual warmth, and there was Bob bounding over to me like he hadn't seen me in ages. I couldn't help but smile, feeling instantly at home with my favorite friend by my side. I had no idea, though, that this night would be unlike any other. After spending the afternoon playing with Bob in the yard, I went inside to rest for a bit. I figured he'd wandered off to explore somewhere. He had a habit of taking little adventures around the property. But as the minutes stretched on, I started feeling a strange unease. It wasn't like Bob to disappear for too long, especially when we were together. Later, as I sat on the porch watching my grandma prepare dinner through the kitchen window, I caught a glimpse of movement by the bushes at the far end of the yard. I squinted, and there he was, Bob, emerging from the shadows. But something was wrong. The way he moved felt off. He was slower, almost dragging his back legs, and his head hung low as if weighed down by something unseen. As he came closer, a chill ran down my spine. Bob looked different. His eyes were vacant, hollow, as if all the light had been drained from them. His back legs seemed longer too, stretched in a way that made him appear taller, twisted, even misshapen. It was as though he'd grown somehow, his form distorted and unnatural. A cold fear gripped me as I took a step back, feeling my pulse quicken. This wasn't the Bob I knew. I wanted to call out to him, but the words stuck in my throat. The creature that looked like Bob was now standing on the porch, staring at me with those dead, unseeing eyes, and I realized that whatever or whoever this was, it wasn't my friend anymore. As the fear gripped me tighter, I shouted for my grandma, my voice cracking with panic. She looked over from the kitchen and, seeing the fear in my eyes, called out sharply for me to come inside. I didn't hesitate. I bolted through the door, my heart pounding as I slammed it shut behind me. From the window, I watched Bob slowly approach the porch, his eyes still hauntingly empty. Once he was on the porch, he lay down, but in a way that seemed unnatural, almost as if his body was too heavy for him. And then, to my shock, he began to whimper a low, constant sound that sent chills through me. It wasn't the kind of sound Bob would normally make. It was deeper, almost mournful, like he was in some kind of unimaginable pain or despair. The sound filled the silence, echoing through the walls and making the entire house feel cold and strange. I looked over at my grandma, hoping for some reassurance, but I could tell by the look on her face that she was just as disturbed. She glanced back at me, and in that moment, I knew she felt it too. This wasn't Bob anymore. This was something dark and twisted, something that didn't belong here. The air felt thick, oppressive, and the tension in the room was suffocating. I backed away from the window, trying to block out the sound of Bob's pitiful cries, but they seemed to seep into every corner of the house. I could feel something malevolent lingering, something unseen, and it was as if the very walls were closing in, trapping me with whatever was left of Bob. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly, deeply wrong. Bob's cries filled the air, chilling me to the bone, and my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. My grandma and I stayed inside, barely speaking, as if words might somehow draw whatever evil presence lurked within Bob closer to us. I kept my eyes on the door, half expecting him to break through and reveal whatever terrible transformation had taken place. The night dragged on with an oppressive weight, the kind of darkness that felt like it could swallow you whole. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow seemed to pulse with something sinister. I didn't dare look outside again, afraid of what I might see, or worse, what might see me. I knew Bob had been a good dog, loving and loyal, but now it felt like something dark had taken hold of him, twisting him into something unrecognizable. Eventually, the whimpering faded, replaced by an eerie silence that felt just as disturbing. My grandma and I sat in that silence, unable to sleep, as though staying awake was the only thing keeping whatever darkness hovered over us at bay. I didn't know if Bob was still out there, lurking in the shadows, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had entered our lives that night, something malevolent that wasn't going to leave easily. Even now, I can't look at that porch without remembering the night everything changed. The memory of Bob's empty, unnatural gaze haunts me, a constant reminder of the mystery I'll never fully understand. Whatever happened to Bob, it left a mark, a sinister presence that lingers in the back of my mind, making me question just how close we came to something truly evil.